The sun hung low over the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of amber and rust. It was the hour when decent folk hurried home to their suppers, when the saloon began its nightly symphony of clinking glasses and rough laughter. But for Eleanor Whitfield, there was no home to hurry to, no family table waiting with steaming dishes and warm conversation. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, keeping her eyes fixed on the wooden sidewalk as she made her way down Main Street. The fabric, once a rich burgundy, had faded to the color of dried blood, like everything else about her life. It bore the marks of a fall from grace. "There she goes," came the sharp whisper from Mrs. Henley's porch. The merchant's wife sat with her needlework circle, their fingers as busy as their tongues, bold as brass, walking our streets. "The nerve of some people," agreed Mrs. Patterson, her needle jabbing through the fabric with particular venom. "After what she did." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. She'd learned that acknowledging their words only made things worse. The whispers followed her like dust devils, swirling around her ankles with every step. Once, she might have stopped to defend herself, to explain that things weren't as they seemed, but that was before she understood that in a place like Cedar Ridge, the truth mattered less than what people chose to believe. 6 months ago, she'd been Miss Eleanor Whitfield, daughter of the late Judge Whitfield, educated back east and returned home to care for her ailing father. She'd worn fine dresses ordered from San Francisco, had been invited to every social gathering, had even caught the eye of Thomas Brennan, the banker's son. That life seemed like a story someone else had lived, a fairy tale dissolved by the harsh, alkaline truth of frontier justice. The incident that destroyed her reputation had been swift and merciless. A late-night visit to comfort the widow Martinez, whose husband had died in the mines. A sudden illness that kept Eleanor there through the night. By morning, when she emerged disheveled and exhausted from tending the fevered woman, Samuel Hayes had been passing by. The ranch foreman's imagination had painted a different picture, one he'd been eager to share at the saloon. The story grew with each telling, twisted and embellished until even Eleanor hardly recognized it. The fact that Widow Martinez had testified to her innocence mattered little. She was Mexican, after all, and her word carried no weight against that of a white man who'd fought in the war. Besides, as Mrs. Henley had pointed out with barely concealed satisfaction, what kind of proper young lady stayed out all night, regardless of the reason? Eleanor paused outside Morrison's general store, studying the help wanted sign in the window. She'd inquired about the position last week, but Mr. Morrison had hemmed and hawed before declaring he'd found someone else. The sign had reappeared the next day, through the glass. She caught sight of her reflection and barely recognized herself. Her honey-colored hair, once styled in elaborate rolls and curls, now hung in a simple braid down her back. Her cheeks had lost their roses, her gray eyes their spark. The dress she wore, a plain brown calico, had been mended so many times that patches overlapped patches. Yet, beneath the weathered exterior, something remained unbroken. A straightness to her spine, a firmness to her chin that refused to bow completely to shame. "Miss Whitfield." She turned to find Reverend Collins approaching, his black coat dusty from his rounds. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps the minister would offer Christian charity, a word of comfort. "Reverend," she said softly, inclining her head. He glanced around nervously, as if being seen speaking to her might taint his own reputation. "I've been meaning to speak with you about your situation. Perhaps it would be best if you considered moving on, starting fresh somewhere else, for everyone's sake." The words hit her like a physical blow. Even the church, that last bastion of forgiveness and redemption, wanted her gone. "I have nowhere else to go, Reverend. This is my home." "Was your home," he corrected gently but firmly. "Sometimes the Lord calls us to wander in the wilderness before we can find our promised land." He tipped his hat and hurried away, leaving Eleanor standing alone on the sidewalk. The sun had dropped lower, painting longer shadows across the street. In the distance, she could hear the evening stage arriving, bringing new faces who would soon learn to avoid her, too. Her small room at the boarding house would be stifling in the evening heat. Mrs. Garrett, the proprietress, had made it clear that her continued residence there was a favor that could be revoked at any time. The other boarders avoided her in the hallways, and she took her meals alone in her room to spare everyone the discomfort of her presence at the communal table. Eleanor began walking again, past the last of the shops, past the church with its white steeple pointing accusingly at heaven. At the edge of town, she stopped and looked out at the vast expanse of desert and mountains beyond. The landscape stretched endlessly, painted in shades of ochre and sage, dotted with Joshua trees that stood like prophets in the wilderness. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. It tugged at her shawl, her skirts, as if urging her to follow Reverend Collins' advice, to disappear into that vastness and never return. But where would she go? She had no money beyond the few coins she'd saved from selling her mother's jewelry, no family to take her in, no skills beyond the genteel accomplishments that were useless in a world that had branded her fallen. As the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the mountains, Eleanor turned back toward town. Tomorrow, she would try again. She would knock on doors, seeking work as a laundress, a cook, anything that might earn her enough to survive. She would endure the whispers, the turned backs, the small cruelties that had become her daily bread. In the gathering darkness, she didn't notice the figure watching from the rocks above town, a lone Apache warrior, scouting the settlement that encroached ever further into his people's territory. He saw the woman walking alone, saw how the others of her kind shunned her, and wondered at the strange ways of the white people who could be so cruel to their own. Eleanor Whitfield, once the toast of Cedar Ridge, made her solitary way back to her small room, unaware that her life was about to intersect with another outcast, another soul marked by difference and defiance. The desert night closed in around the town, stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky like pinpricks of hope in a fabric of despair. The decision came to Eleanor in the gray hour before dawn, when even the mockingbirds hadn't yet begun their morning chorus. She packed her few possessions by candlelight: 2 dresses, a comb that had been her mother's, a small leather Bible, and the last of her coins wrapped in a handkerchief. The room that had been her refuge in prison for 6 months looked even smaller in the flickering light, its bare walls offering no farewell. Mrs. Garrett was already awake, sitting in her parlor with a cup of coffee and her ledger. She looked up as Eleanor descended the stairs, her carpetbag in hand. "Leaving us, are you?" The older woman's voice held no surprise. "Can't say I blame you. Can't say I'm sorry to see you go. Neither." Eleanor placed her room key on the hall table. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Garrett." "Hospitality." The woman snorted. "That's a pretty word for it. You paid your rent on time. I'll give you that, more than some can say." She paused, then added with something that might have been a shade of kindness, "There's biscuits and bacon in the kitchen. Take some for the road." It was more generosity than Eleanor had received in months. She wrapped the food in a cloth, adding it to her meager supplies. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as she stepped out onto the porch. Cedar Ridge slept on, unaware and uncaring that one of its own was stealing away like a thief. Eleanor had no clear destination in mind, only a vague notion of heading toward the mountains. Perhaps she could find work at one of the mining camps, where they might be less particular about a woman's reputation. Or maybe she could simply disappear into the wilderness, become one of those cautionary tales mothers told their daughters about women who ventured too far from civilization. The road out of town was rough, carved by wagon wheels and scarred by flash floods. Eleanor's boots, made for parlor floors and church socials, were ill-suited for such travel. Within an hour, she could feel blisters forming. By noon, when the sun reached its merciless zenith, her water was half gone and her dress was soaked with perspiration. She found shade beneath a cluster of mesquite trees, their thorny branches offering scant protection from the heat. The mountains that had looked so near from town seemed no closer, wavering like a mirage in the distance. Eleanor ate one of Mrs. Garrett's biscuits slowly, savoring each crumb, and allowed herself a single sip of water. The sound of horses made her look up. 3 riders were approaching from the direction of town, and even at a distance, she recognized the lazy slouch of Jake Coulter in the lead. Her heart sank. Coulter and his associates made their living in the gray areas between legal and illegal catching wild horses, guiding travelers, and engaging in activities that decent folk pretended not to know about. "Well, well," Coulter drawled as they reined up near her. "Look what we found. Boys, Miss High and Mighty Whitfield, out for a stroll." The other 2, Earl Briggs and a Mexican they called Chavez, grinned unpleasantly. Eleanor stood, brushing the dust from her skirts with as much dignity as she could muster. "Mr. Coulter," she said evenly. "I'll be on my way." "On your way where, exactly?" Coulter dismounted, moving to block her path. "Seems to me a lady traveling alone needs protection. All sorts of dangerous folk in these parts. Indians, bandits." He smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Course, protection don't come free." "I have no money," Eleanor said, which was nearly true. "Money ain't the only currency out here. Miss Whitfield, you ought to know that by now." He reached out to touch her face, and Eleanor jerked back. "Leave the woman be," Chavez said suddenly. "We got business in Tucson." Coulter's eyes narrowed. "Since when do you give orders?" The tension crackled between the men like heat lightning. Earl shifted nervously in his saddle. "Jake, maybe we should—" The arrow appeared as if conjured from air, striking the ground between Coulter's boots with enough force to make him stumble backward. A second arrow knocked his hat from his head. The horses whinnied and danced as their riders fought for control. From the rocks above, a figure emerged, tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. The Apache warrior held a third arrow, nocked but not drawn. His message clear. His face was painted with red ochre, his long black hair bound with a leather strip. He wore traditional dress, breechcloth, leggings, and a cotton shirt that had seen better days. "Apache," Earl yelped, wheeling his horse around. Coulter scrambled for his pistol, but another arrow whizzed past his ear, close enough to draw blood. The warrior spoke then, his voice carrying the authority of mountains and thunder. Though Eleanor couldn't understand the words, he says, "Go." Chavez translated, his face pale. He says, "Go now, or the next arrow find your heart." Coulter needed no further encouragement. He mounted his horse clumsily, glaring at Eleanor as if this were somehow her fault. "This ain't over," he snarled, but the threat rang hollow as he spurred his horse after his already fleeing companions. Eleanor stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The warrior descended from the rocks with an easy, economical grace. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 summers, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her dusty dress, her blistered hands, the carpet bag that held all her worldly possessions. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but still incomprehensible. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, surprised to find her voice steady. "Thank you, but I don't understand." He tilted his head slightly, then gestured toward the mountains. When she didn't move, he pointed at the sun, then swept his hand across the sky to indicate its path. Then he pointed at her, made a falling motion, and shook his head. The message was clear. Traveling in the heat of the day would kill her. The warrior moved to his horse, hidden behind the rocks, and returned with a water gourd. He offered it to her, and, after a moment's hesitation, Eleanor drank. The water was cool, flavored with something she couldn't identify, but which eased the burning in her throat. Without another word, he gathered his arrows and mounted his horse, a painted pony that looked as wild as its rider. He looked back at her once, those dark eyes unreadable, then rode off toward the mountains, leaving Eleanor alone with her wonder and confusion. She stayed in the shade of the mesquites until evening, following the Apache's advice. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. She resumed her journey. Her feet still hurt. Her water was still limited. But something had changed. The encounter with the warrior had shown her that even in this harsh land, unexpected kindness could bloom like a desert flower. As darkness fell, Eleanor found shelter in a shallow cave, really just an overhang of rock that offered protection from the night winds. She ate another biscuit, rationed her water carefully, and tried not to think about tomorrow. In the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, their calls echoing across the vast emptiness. She thought about the warrior, his sure movements, the way he'd faced down 3 armed men without flinching. There had been no pity in his eyes when he looked at her, no judgment either, just a recognition of one human being in need and the simple decision to help. Eleanor wrapped herself in her shawl and tried to sleep, unaware that eyes watched from the darkness, the same eyes that had seen her ostracism in town, her courage in leaving, her grace under threat. The Apache warrior had not gone far. Something about this white woman intrigued him, her dignity in the face of disgrace, her determination to survive against all odds. She reminded him of a hawk he'd once seen with a broken wing, still fierce despite its injury. The desert night deepened around them, filled with its secret sounds and movements, hiding 2 souls who'd touched briefly across the divide of different worlds, not knowing that fate would bring them together again. The creek ran clear and cold from the mountain springs, hidden in a grove of cottonwoods that whispered secrets to the wind. Eleanor had found it by following deer tracks, a skill she'd learned through necessity over the past weeks. She'd built her shelter nearby, a simple lean-to of branches and mud that kept out the worst of the weather. Though it would never grace the pages of Godey's lady's book, life had taken on new rhythms. Dawn meant checking her snares for rabbits, gathering wood for the fire, hauling water from the creek. She'd learned to identify edible plants through trial and painful error, to read the sky for weather, to move quietly enough that sometimes she could watch the deer come down to drink. Her hands, once soft and white, were now brown and calloused. Her hair, no longer tortured into proper styles, hung free or in a simple braid. She was cleaning a rabbit by the creek when she sensed she wasn't alone. The feeling had become familiar over the past days, a prickling awareness that made her look up from her work. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the Apache warrior. He carried a deer over his shoulders, moving with no more effort than if it were a sack of flour. Their eyes met across the space, and Eleanor felt the same mix of wariness and curiosity that had marked their first encounter. Without speaking, he laid the deer near her shelter and began the work of butchering it. Eleanor watched from a distance, noting the efficiency of his movements, the respect he showed for the animal even in death. When he separated a hindquarter and gestured toward her, she understood. This was a gift, or perhaps a trade. She brought him water in her tin cup, the only vessel she had. He drank, nodded his thanks, and continued his work. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. Rather, it felt like the natural quiet of the wilderness, where words were less important than actions. Over the following days, these encounters became a pattern. He would appear with game or wild plants she hadn't known were edible. She would share her meager supplies, the last of her flour made into ash cakes, berries she'd gathered, the small fish she'd learned to catch with a handmade trap. They never spoke, communicating instead through gestures and expressions. Eleanor began to anticipate his visits, though she couldn't predict when he would come. Sometimes days would pass without sight of him, and she would catch herself scanning the tree line more often than necessary. When he did appear, always without warning, she felt a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she carried. On a morning when frost silvered the grass, he arrived with something different, a bundle of fur that proved to be a rabbit-skin blanket, soft and warm. Eleanor ran her fingers over it wonderingly, then looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. When she tried to give him her mother's comb in return, one of her few remaining treasures, he gently pushed her hand away and spoke a single word. Gift. It was the first English word she'd heard him speak, accented but clear. Thank you, she said, clutching the blanket. What is your name? He considered this, and then touched his chest. Naichi. Naichi, she repeated, testing the unfamiliar sounds. I'm Eleanor. Eleanor. He frowned slightly at the complexity of it, then surprised her with what might have been a smile. Elena. Close enough. She found herself smiling back. That evening, as she huddled in her new blanket beside the fire, Eleanor heard horses approaching. Her heart seized with the familiar fear of discovery. She grabbed the knife Naichi had left her, a proper skinning knife that had become her constant companion, and melted back into the shadows. 4 riders picked their way along the creek, and Eleanor recognized the worn blue uniform of cavalry scouts. They were rough-looking men, the kind the army used to track Indians, men who knew the territory and had few scruples about how they used that knowledge. Creek's running clear, one said. Good place to water the horses. Keep your eyes open, another replied. Saw Apache sign 2 days back. Could be a camp nearby. They dismounted, letting their horses drink while they filled their canteens. Eleanor held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice her shelter hidden in the trees. But one of them, a sharp-eyed scout with a tobacco-stained beard, was already studying the ground. Someone's been here, he announced. Recent, 2 fire pits been used. The men immediately became alert, hands moving to weapons. Eleanor gripped her knife tighter, knowing it would be useless against 4 armed men. She thought wildly of trying to slip away, but any movement would draw their attention. White woman's tracks. The scout continued, examining the ground near the water. Small boots, fancy ones, by the look. White woman living alone out here? The sergeant sounded skeptical. More likely some squaw wearing stolen goods. They began moving toward her shelter, and Eleanor knew she was moments from discovery. Then an owl called from the trees, except it was still daylight, too early for owls. The horses suddenly shied, whinnying nervously. What's got into them? The sergeant demanded. A stone clattered in the rocks above. Then another. The men spun, weapons drawn, scanning the heights. More stones fell, from different directions now, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. Apache? One man whispered. Could be a whole band up there, another said, voice tight with fear. The sergeant, a veteran of too many ambushes, made a quick decision. Mount up, we're leaving. Now. They didn't need to be told twice. Within moments, they were galloping away, leaving dust and Eleanor's thundering heartbeat in their wake. She stayed hidden until full dark, hardly daring to breathe. When she finally emerged, Naichi was sitting by her fire as if he'd been there all along. He was roasting a piece of the venison he'd brought days earlier, the smell making her stomach growl. You? She asked, gesturing toward where the stones had fallen. He shrugged, turning the meat. Soldiers look for Apache. Find Apache. His English was halting but clear. Not find Elena. She sank down beside him, weak with relief and gratitude. They would have, a woman alone. No, he said simply. Why I watch. The admission that he'd been protecting her, watching over her, should have frightened Eleanor. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. They ate in companionable silence, sharing the meat and the last of her berries. As the fire burned low, Naichi spoke again, his voice thoughtful. Your people, they hurt you. It wasn't a question. Eleanor stared into the flames, remembering the whispers, the turned backs, the righteous condemnation of those she'd once called friends. They thought I did something shameful, she said at last. Something that wasn't true. But the truth didn't matter. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. My people say whites speak with 2 tongues. Say one thing, mean another. Make promises, break them. He looked at her directly. You different. You speak true. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at this simple acceptance. Here was a man her society called savage, showing her more kindness and respect than any civilized person had in months. Your people must wonder where you go, she said, deflecting from her emotion. His jaw tightened slightly. Some wonder, Some say I spend too much time watching whites. Say I forget Apache ways. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. But Apache way is to see clear, think clear. I see Elena needs help, so I help. The next morning, he taught her to build better snares, to find water in dry places, to read the subtle signs of approaching weather. Eleanor absorbed it all, marveling at knowledge accumulated over generations, passed down through patient teaching just as he was teaching her. When a sudden thunderstorm caught them in the open, he led her to a cave he knew, dry and safe. They waited out the storm there, and he told her in his careful English about his family, a sister married to a farmer near the reservation, a brother who joined the Army Scouts, parents dead from the white man's sickness years ago. Eleanor found herself talking, too, about her father, the judge, her mother who died when she was 12, the life she'd lost. Naiche listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood more than his limited English might suggest. As the storm passed and sunlight streamed through the cave entrance, Eleanor realized something had shifted between them. They were no longer strangers trading food and skills. They were... what? Friends seemed too simple a word for this complex understanding that crossed cultures and defied convention. Walking back to her camp, Naiche suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. He listened intently, then turned to her with an expression more serious than she'd seen. "More soldiers coming," he said. "Many, looking for Apache who raid farms to the south." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not safe here now. Not for Apache. Not for white woman living like Apache." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with her still damp clothes. "Where will you go?" "Mountains. Deep places whites don't know." He studied her face. "You could come." The invitation hung between them like a bridge across a chasm. Eleanor knew what accepting would mean, a complete break from her old world, a choice that could never be undone. But what was left for her in that world anyway? Before she could answer, voices carried on the wind. The soldiers were closer than Naiche had thought. He grabbed her hand, the first time he'd touched her deliberately, and pulled her into the trees. "Choose quick, Elena," he said urgently. "Stay and hide from soldiers, or come and live free." Eleanor looked back at her little shelter, at the life she'd built from nothing. Then she looked at Naiche, at the hand still holding hers, at the promise of something beyond mere survival. The voices grew louder. Time had run out for indecision. Eleanor chose to stay. The decision came not from fear of the unknown, but from a stubborn refusal to be driven from yet another home. Naiche understood without words, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands before melting into the forest like smoke. Inside, she later found herbs for healing and a carved stone amulet. Protection, she assumed, though from what dangers she couldn't guess. The soldiers passed within 50 yards of her shelter but never found it. Eleanor spent 3 days hidden, living on dried meat and creek water, barely daring to breathe when patrols came near. When they finally moved on, following rumors of Apache camps deeper in the mountains, she emerged feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. Days stretched into weeks with no sign of Naiche. Eleanor continued her daily routines, but the forest felt emptier, the silence heavier. She caught herself listening for footsteps that never came, watching for movement in the trees that proved to be only wind and shadow. Then the rumors reached her, carried by a traveling peddler she encountered while foraging far from her camp. The man, suspicious but willing to trade news for the rabbit pelts she'd accumulated, told her about the white woman living with Apaches, seen by soldiers near the old mission ruins. "Scandalous thing," he said, spitting tobacco juice. "They say she's gone completely wild. Dresses like them, lives like them. Some even say she's taken up with one of their warriors." Eleanor kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart raced. "How terrible," she managed. "Who is this woman?" "Don't rightly know her name, but she must be touched in the head. What decent woman would choose such a life?" He eyed Eleanor's worn dress and sun-browned skin with sudden suspicion. "You out here all alone, miss?" "My husband's hunting." Eleanor lied smoothly. He'll be back soon." The peddler left hastily, but the damage was done. Within days, Eleanor noticed signs of increased activity in the area, hoofprints where none had been before, the remnants of campfires, once even voices carrying on the still night air. The search for the white woman with the Apaches had intensified, and her own presence here would only draw more attention. She was gathering water at dawn when they found her. Not soldiers this time, but civilians. A group of 5 men from Cedar Ridge, led by none other than Thomas Brennan, the banker's son she'd once thought she might marry. "Eleanor?" Thomas's voice cracked with disbelief. "My God, it is you." She straightened slowly, water bucket in hand, meeting their stares with as much dignity as she could muster. Besides Thomas, she recognized Frank Morrison from the general store, the minister's son, Paul Collins, and 2 ranch hands she knew by sight. "Hello, Thomas," she said quietly. "We heard, that is, there were rumors about a white woman living rough out here." Thomas dismounted, approaching her cautiously as if she might bolt like a wild animal. "Eleanor, what has happened to you?" She almost laughed at the question. What had happened? Society had cast her out, branded her fallen for an act of kindness twisted by malicious tongues. But looking at Thomas's shocked face, she knew he wouldn't understand. "I'm surviving," she said simply. "This is no life for a woman like you." Frank Morrison interjected. "Living like a savage, alone in the wilderness. It ain't proper." "Since when has anyone in Cedar Ridge cared about what's proper concerning me?" Eleanor's voice carried more bite than she'd intended. The men shifted uncomfortably, but Thomas pressed on. "That's why we're here. To bring you back. To make things right." "Right?" Now she did laugh, bitter and short. "6 months ago, not one of you would speak to me on the street." "What's changed?" Thomas had the grace to flush. "We've learned the truth. Samuel Hayes confessed when he was dying last month. Said he'd lied about that night, about what he saw. The widow Martinez was telling the truth all along." The words Eleanor had longed to hear for so long now fell like stones into still water, creating ripples she couldn't quite grasp. Vindication, but at what cost? And why now? "So you've come to rescue me," she said flatly. "To restore my reputation." "Your father was a respected man," Paul Collins said earnestly. "The town owes you." "The town owes me nothing," Eleanor interrupted. "And I want nothing from it." "You can't mean to stay here," Thomas said, gesturing at her simple shelter, her rough clothes. "Living like this. What would people think?" "I stopped caring what people think the day they decided I was worthless based on one man's lie. But now they know the truth. The truth didn't matter then. Why should it matter now?" Eleanor set down her bucket, facing them squarely. "I've made a life here. It may not be the life you'd choose, but it's mine." "There's more," Frank said reluctantly. "The woman living with the Apaches, we know it's you. Soldiers described you clearly enough. You've been seen with that savage, and now the whole territory's talking." Eleanor's chin lifted. "His name is Naichi, and he's shown me more kindness and honor than any civilized man in Cedar Ridge." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas's face darkened. "So it's true. You've taken up with one of them." "I've accepted help from someone who offered it freely, without judgment or condition. If that scandalizes you, then you understand nothing." "Eleanor, please." Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I know I failed you before. We all did, but I'm here now. Come back with us. I'll marry you. Make an honest woman of you again." The proposal, delivered like a business proposition, like he was doing her a great favor, might once have been everything Eleanor wanted. Now it struck her as almost pitifully inadequate. "I am an honest woman. Thomas, I always was. Your recognition of that fact doesn't make it more or less true." "You'd choose him over your own kind?" Paul's voice rose with indignation. "Over Christianity and civilization?" "I choose freedom," Eleanor said quietly. "I choose to live where my worth isn't determined by gossip and lies, The Apache wars aren't over. One of the ranch hands spoke up. Army's planning a big campaign come spring. Any white found with hostiles will be treated as hostile. You could hang, then I'll hang free. Thomas made one last attempt. Eleanor, I'm begging you. Whatever attachment you think you have to this Indian, it isn't real. It's gratitude mixed with loneliness. Come home. Let us help you remember who you really are. I know exactly who I am, Eleanor replied, perhaps for the first time in my life. Heavy footsteps in the underbrush made everyone turn. Naichi emerged from the trees, and Eleanor's heart leaped despite the danger. He took in the scene with one sweeping glance. 5 armed white men. Eleanor facing them down alone. He moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that his presence felt like a shield. When he spoke, his words were in Apache, but his tone was unmistakable. A warning. A claim. What's he saying? Frank demanded nervously. Eleanor didn't know the exact words, but she understood their essence. He says you're on Apache land. He says you should go. This is American territory, Paul began hotly. Naichi cut him off with a gesture, then spoke again, this time in English, each word clear and deliberate. You hurt this woman. Call her bad names. Make her outcast. Now you want her back? He looked at each man in turn, his dark eyes holding depths of contempt. Apache not so cruel to their women. Eleanor doesn't belong to you, Thomas said, his hand moving to his pistol. Naiche's hand was faster, his knife appearing as if by magic, but he didn't threaten, merely held it loose at his side. When he spoke next, his words changed everything. Elena belongs to no one, he said, but she is under my protection. Always. He turned to Eleanor then, switching to Apache, his voice softer but still carrying to the others. Then, in English, so there could be no misunderstanding. You belong to me forever. The words should have angered Eleanor, another man claiming ownership. But she heard what the others couldn't. Not possession, but promise. Not dominance, but dedication. In Apache culture, she'd learned, such words were sacred, unbreakable. Yes, she said simply, in front of them all. I choose this. Thomas went white. Eleanor, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She met each of their eyes in turn. Go back to Cedar Ridge. Tell them Eleanor Whitfield is dead if you must. Tell them anything. But don't come looking for me again. The Army, Frank started. The Army can go to hell, Eleanor said calmly, causing Paul to gasp at the profanity. And so can anyone who thinks they have the right to dictate how I live. Naichi moved then. Just a shift in posture, but it was enough to make the men step back. You go now, he said. Not come back. Elena under Apache protection. Any who heard her answer to me, to all Apache. It was no idle threat. The men knew it. Eleanor knew it. And most importantly, Naichi meant it. This was more than personal now. It was tribal law, ancient and immutable. Thomas made one last appeal. Eleanor, please, think of your immortal soul. My soul is my own business, she replied. It always was. They left then, reluctantly, with many backward glances and muttered threats about the Army and justice. Eleanor and Naichi stood side by side, watching until the dust of their departure settled. You could have gone, Naichi said quietly. Back to your life. That was never my life. Eleanor replied, it was a cage I was trained to think was home. He studied her face. My words. You understand? Not own like horse or rifle, protect like... He searched for the right comparison. Like sacred mountain, like holy spring. Always there, always guarded, always free. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I understand. Good. He sheathed his knife. Now we go. This place not safe. They come back with soldiers. As Eleanor gathered her few possessions, she felt the last chains of her old life falling away. Whatever came next, hardship, danger, even death, she would face it on her own terms, with someone who saw her as she truly was. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Somewhere behind them, 5 men would carry tales back to Cedar Ridge, stories that would grow in the telling. But Eleanor Whitfield no longer cared what stories others told about her. She was writing her own. We tried the hidden canyon where Nietzsche brought her lay deep in the mountains, accessible only through a narrow defile that 2 people could defend against an army. A spring bubbled from the rocks, feeding a small pool before disappearing underground. Ancient cottonwoods provided shade, their leaves whispering stories older than memory. My people come here for generations, Nietzsche explained as he helped her set up a proper shelter. Sacred place, safe place. Eleanor felt the peace of it immediately, a quality of silence different from mere quiet, as if the very stones had absorbed centuries of prayer and contemplation. Here, the outside world seemed like a distant dream, under Nietzsche's patient instruction. Her wilderness skills sharpened from mere survival to something approaching mastery. He taught her to read tracks like words on a page. Here, a deer had paused to drink. There, a mountain lion had passed 3 days ago. She learned which plants healed fever, which stopped bleeding, which could kill or cure depending on the dose. Your hands, he said one day, taking them in his to show her how to strip sinew for bowstrings. No longer soft. Eleanor looked at her calloused palms, the short nails, the small scars from countless tasks. Do you miss them soft? She asked, half teasing. His fingers traced one of the scars gently. Soft hands cannot build, cannot heal, cannot fight. He met her eyes. These hands show strength. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Then Nietzsche released her hands and returned to his teaching. But something had shifted in the air they shared. Days took on a rhythm as natural as breathing. Dawn meant checking snares, gathering wood, tending the fire that never quite died. Mornings were for hunting or foraging, learning to move silent as shadows through the forest. Afternoons brought different lessons, the Apache language, which Eleanor absorbed with growing fluency. Stories of his people that explained not just how to survive, but why survival mattered. Long ago, Nietzsche told her one evening as they watched stars emerge. Before whites come, Apache live free from sunset mountains to sunrise plains. Each season, we follow the path Creator set for us. Hunt, gather, pray, keep the world in balance. What happened? Eleanor asked, though she knew the broad strokes from newspapers and dinner party conversations that now seemed to have taken place in another lifetime. Whites want to own the land, Nietzsche said simply. But how can you own the wind? How can you fence the rain? They take, push Apache into smaller places. Say we must farm like them. Pray to their God. Forget Apache ways. His voice carried old pain. Generations of loss. Some Apache fight. Some try to walk white man's road. Both ways lead to sorrow. Which way do you choose? He was quiet for so long, Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. I choose to remember, he said finally. Keep old ways alive, even if only in small places. Like this canyon. Like teaching you. But I'm white, Eleanor pointed out. You were white, Nietzsche corrected. Now you are between worlds. Like me. He gestured at his cotton shirt, the metal knife at his belt. I use white man's tools when they serve, speak white man's tongue when needed, but my heart remains Apache. Eleanor understood. She too existed between worlds now, no longer the judge's daughter, but not truly Apache either. It should have felt lonely, but instead she found freedom in the liminal space. As autumn days shortened toward winter, their partnership deepened into something neither quite named. They worked in easy synchrony, Eleanor scraping hides while Nietzsche repaired tools, sharing meals in comfortable silence, communicating often without words. When she laughed at something, a rabbit outsmarting their snares, a particularly stubborn knot in her weaving, his eyes would warm in a way that made her heart skip. One cold morning, Eleanor woke to find fresh snow dusting the canyon rim. Nietzsche was already up, adding wood to the fire. Winter comes early, he said. Need more preparation. They spent the day gathering piñon nuts and checking their stores. As Eleanor reached for a high branch, Her foot slipped on loose stone. Naichi caught her instantly, his arms strung around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Careful," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at him. They'd been this close before, during lessons, passing in the narrow shelter. But this was different. This was choice. "Naichi," she whispered. He touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Elena," he said, and in that single word she heard questions and promises and fears all mingled together. She answered by rising on her toes, bringing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, two people testing unfamiliar ground. Then his arms tightened around her, and she pressed closer, and tentative became certain. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Naichi rested his forehead against hers. "This changes much," he said. "Everything." Eleanor agreed. Do you want—" He silenced her with another kiss, briefer but no less intense. "Want you since first day," he admitted. "Stubborn white woman facing men with guns and only small knife. Thought, this one has warrior heart." Eleanor laughed, surprising herself. "I was terrified. Fear and courage live in same heart," Naichi said. "Cannot have one without other." They stood there in the snow-touched morning, holding each other, while the world shifted and resettled around this new truth between them. That evening, Naichi told her about his first wife, speaking her name for the first time. "Dahlia, killed in a cavalry raid 5 years ago along with their infant son. Thought my heart died with them," he said, staring into the fire. "Became like stone. Fight, hunt, survive, but not live. Then I see you. Heart remembers it can still beat." Eleanor took his hand, understanding the magnitude of this confession. "My heart was stone too," she said. "Turned that way by shame and lies. You helped me remember it could feel." They moved into the shelter together that night, sharing warmth and closeness, discovering how two damaged hearts might heal each other. Eleanor traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival, while he unwound her hair and marveled at its color in the firelight. "Like sunset," he murmured. "Like leaves turning gold." They loved with the careful tenderness of those who'd known too much pain, finding in each other not just passion but sanctuary. Morning brought the sound of horses in the canyon below. Naichi was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle. Eleanor dressed quickly, her heart pounding. "Stay here," he ordered, but she followed him to the lookout point. Below, a band of Apaches made their way up the trail, 3 warriors and 2 women, heavily laden horses trailing behind. Naichi relaxed slightly. "My cousin," he explained. "Victorio, others from our band." Eleanor hung back as Naichi descended to meet them, aware of how she must look, a white woman in Apache territory, wearing a mixture of her old clothes and native dress. The newcomer's expressions ranged from surprise to suspicion to outright hostility. The conversation in Apache was rapid and heated. Eleanor caught perhaps half the words, enough to understand they were discussing her. One of the women, young and beautiful with flashing dark eyes, seemed particularly upset. Finally, Naichi beckoned Eleanor down. She came slowly, head high despite her nerves. "This is Elena," Naichi said in English, then repeated it in Apache. "She is under my protection." Victorio, older than Naichi, with a face marked by wind and weather, studied her carefully. When he spoke, it was in accented but clear English. "The white woman the soldiers seek." It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. "You bring danger to us," one of the warriors said harshly. "Soldiers come looking. Find our people. I bring no more danger than already exists." Eleanor replied in Apache, causing surprise to flicker across their faces. "Soldiers always look for Apache. This does not change." The young woman, Lozin, Naichi called her, stepped forward. "You are the one who refused to return to the White Town? Who chose Apache way?" "I chose freedom," Eleanor said carefully. "Naichi teaches me to survive." "Teaches more than survive, I think," Lozin said with a sharp look at Naichi. Victorio raised a hand for silence. These are troubled times. Soldiers press hard from all sides. Agent at reservation says surrender or starve. He looked between Naichi and Eleanor. But Apache law is Apache law. If Naichi claims you as his woman, that is his right. Not his woman, Eleanor said firmly. His equal, his partner. We choose each other. A long moment of silence followed her words. Then, unexpectedly, Victorio smiled. You speak like Apache woman, he said. Maybe there is hope for you yet. The group made camp in the canyon that night. Eleanor helped the women prepare food, weathering their initial coolness with patient determination. When she produced her own piñon nuts to add to the meal, when she properly prepared the rabbits Naichi had caught, barriers began to lower slightly. After dinner, stories were shared around the fire. Victorio told of increasing pressure from the army, of bands forced onto reservations where promised food never came, of children sent to white schools where they were forbidden to speak Apache. They want to kill us without bullets, he said bitterly. Kill our spirit, our ways, make us weak copies of white men. Some of us will never surrender. The harsh warrior, Nana, declared. Better to die free than live in chains. And our children? One of the women asked quietly. They die too? The question hung heavy in the smoke-scented air. Eleanor felt the weight of it, the impossible choices faced by people pushed to the edge of existence. She thought of her own comfortable childhood, the privilege she'd taken for granted, built on land taken from people like these. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for what my people have done. Your sorrow changes nothing, Lozan said, but not unkindly. Actions matter, not words. Then I will act, Eleanor said. I will learn your ways, preserve them as Naichi preserves them. I will tell true stories if the chance comes, not the lies printed in newspapers. And if soldiers come, Nana challenged. You fight your own people. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. They are not my people anymore. They cast me out for a lie. You took me in with truth. She reached for Naichi's hand. I stand with those who stand with me. Later, as the others slept, Victorio approached Eleanor where she sat keeping watch. You know what comes, white woman who would be Apache? War, Eleanor said simply. Death, hardship, perhaps, or perhaps worse, slow strangling of all we are. He studied the stars. Naichi says you have warrior heart. We shall see. Heart is proved in hard times, not easy ones. I don't seek to prove anything, Eleanor said. Only to live freely with the man I love. Victorio's weathered face softened slightly. Love in wartime is its own courage, he said. Guard it well. It may be all that survives. The band left at dawn, but not before Lozan pulled Eleanor aside. I loved him once, she said quietly. Naichi, before his first wife, part of me loves him still. Eleanor's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice level. And now I see how he looks at you, how you look at him. Lozan's expression was unreadable. Be worthy of it. He has suffered enough. We both have. Eleanor replied. Lozan nodded slowly. Perhaps that is why you fit. Two broken things sometimes make one whole. She touched Eleanor's arm briefly. Welcome, sister. The path you choose is hard, but you do not walk alone. As the band disappeared into the morning haze, Eleanor stood beside Naichi, feeling the weight and warmth of belonging, not to a place or a people, but to a choice freely made, a love freely given, a life freely claimed. Winter was coming to the mountains, and with it would come hardships she could only imagine. But for now, in this moment, in this sacred canyon with this man beside her, Eleanor Whitfield, who was learning to think of herself simply as Elena, was home. Winter had locked the mountains in ice and silence when the tragedy began. Eleanor first noticed Naichi's absence when he failed to return from a hunting trip that should have taken hours, not days. She waited through the first night, telling herself he was tracking game farther than usual. By the second dawn, fear had replaced reason. She found him at the base of a cliff, his body twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. At first, she thought him dead, but a low moan when she touched him sent relief flooding through her so intense she nearly fainted. "Naichi," she whispered, hands trembling as she assessed his injuries. Blood matted his hair where his head had struck stone. His left shoulder sat wrong, clearly dislocated, and his breathing came shallow and pained broken ribs. Perhaps worse. He opened his eyes, focusing with difficulty. "Elena, horse spooked, mountain cat." "Don't talk," she ordered, her mind racing. She needed to get him back to their shelter, but moving him could worsen unseen injuries. The temperature was dropping, and dark clouds promised snow. Eleanor made her choice. Using her knife, she cut saplings for a travois, lashing them together with strips from her own clothing. Every moment counted, but haste would mean mistakes she couldn't afford. When the makeshift litter was ready, the hardest part began. "This will hurt," she warned, positioning herself to move him. Naichi's face went gray as she shifted him onto the travois, but he bit back any sound. The mile back to their canyon became an eternity. Eleanor pulling the travois inch by painful inch over rough ground, stopping frequently to check that he still breathed. By the time she got him inside their shelter, snow was falling heavily. Eleanor built up the fire and began the careful work of tending his injuries. The dislocated shoulder she managed to reset, guided by his instructions between clenched teeth. The head wound she cleaned and bound with strips of clean cloth, but the ribs worried her most. Each breath brought a wheeze that spoke of internal damage. "Medicine," Naichi gasped. "In my pack, green powder." Eleanor found the buckskin pouch, recognizing the mixture he'd shown her moons ago. She made a tea, supporting his head to help him drink. His skin burned with fever, and she knew the real battle was just beginning. For 3 days, Eleanor barely slept. She kept the fire constant, forced medicine and water between his lips, changed his bandages, and talked to him constantly. Stories of her childhood, plans for spring, anything to keep him anchored to life. When his fever spiked dangerously high, she packed snow around him. When chills shook his body, she lay beside him, sharing her warmth. On the 4th night, she woke to find him watching her with clear eyes. "Elena," he said, voice hoarse but lucid. She burst into tears, the first she'd allowed herself since finding him. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." "Not planning to." He tried to smile, winced. "You saved me. You saved me first." She reminded him. "We're even." Recovery was slow. Naichi chafed at his weakness. Frustrated by his body's betrayal, Eleanor became nurse and hunter both, checking their trap lines in howling storms, rationing their food stores carefully. The intimacy deepened beyond that of lovers to something elemental. Two people bound by absolute trust, absolute need. One night, as wind screamed outside their shelter, Naichi spoke into the darkness. "If I had died, you didn't." Eleanor cut him off. "Listen." His hand found hers. "If I die, you must go to Victorio. He will protect you. You're not dying. Elena." His voice carried the authority of a warrior, even weakened. "Promise me." She squeezed his hand hard. "I promise, but only if you promise to fight, to live, to stay with me." "Always," he said, "in this life and the next." As Naichi slowly healed, the world outside their canyon grew more dangerous. They began to see signs of increased military activity, smoke from many fires, the distant sound of bugle calls. Once, a patrol passed so close they could hear the soldiers complaining about the cold. Spring's arrival brought Victorio's band back to the canyon, and with them, dire news. The army was mounting a massive campaign to force all remaining free Apaches onto reservations. General Morrison leads them, Victorio said grimly. They say he will not stop until every Apache kneels or dies. "How many soldiers?" Naichi asked. He could sit up now, even walk short distances, but Eleanor could see the effort it cost him. "More than all the warriors of all the bands together," came the bleak reply. "They have new guns, Apache scouts to track us, orders to show no mercy. We could go deeper into Mexico." Someone suggested. Mexican soldiers wait there too. Victorio said, "We are pressed between two stones." Eleanor listened to the debate that followed. Fight or flee. Resist or surrender. Die free or live caged. She understood now what Victorio had meant about love in wartime. Every choice carried the weight of extinction. That night, as she changed Nietzsche's bandages, he caught her hands. "You should go," he said quietly. "Return to your people before it's too late." "We've had this conversation," Eleanor said firmly. "The answer hasn't changed." "Everything has changed. Before, you chose between two lives. Now you choose between life and death." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "I chose you. That means accepting whatever comes. My stubborn woman," he said, touching her face. "My stubborn man," she replied. "Now stop trying to send me away and tell me what plants will help that wound heal faster." 2 weeks later, the attack came with shocking suddenness. Eleanor was gathering water at dawn when gunshots shattered the morning peace. She dropped the bucket and ran, reaching the shelter as Nietzsche emerged with his rifle. "Soldiers found us," he said tersely. "Get the packs." They'd prepared for this, essential supplies always ready, escape routes planned, but as they climbed the hidden trail out of the canyon, Eleanor looked back to see blue uniforms swarming their home. Everything they couldn't carry, the carefully cured hides, the baskets she'd learning to weave, the small comforts that had made the shelter home, would be destroyed. The band scattered according to plan, each family group taking a different direction. Nietzsche and Eleanor headed for a predetermined rendezvous deep in the mountains, but his injuries slowed them. By afternoon, they could hear pursuit getting closer. "Go ahead," Nietzsche ordered when they stopped to rest. "I'll hold them here. Give you time." "If you finish that sentence, I'll shoot you myself," Eleanor snapped. "We stay together or not at all." They pressed on, climbing higher into terrain where horses couldn't follow. But the soldiers were persistent, and Nietzsche's strength was failing. As shadows lengthened, they found themselves trapped on a ledge sheer cliff above, deadly drop below, and the sound of soldiers approaching their back trail. "Well," Eleanor said with dark humor, "this is familiar." Despite everything, Nietzsche smiled. "At least this time we face it together." They prepared to make their stand, 2 rifles, limited ammunition, and the determination born of love and desperation. Eleanor thought fleetingly of the life she'd left behind, the safe cage she'd refused. No regrets came, only a fierce gladness that she'd lived these months free and fully alive. The first soldiers appeared around the bend, cautious but confident in their numbers. Eleanor sighted down her rifle, picking her target. Beside her, Nietzsche did the same. "Elena," he said quietly, "you know I love you?" "I know," she replied, "and I love you, in this life and the next." A single hawk circled overhead, crying its wild freedom to the sky. Eleanor took it as a sign, a blessing. Whatever came next, she had chosen her path with open eyes and an open heart. She had been branded fallen, had fallen indeed, fallen into truth, into love, into a life authentic and unashamed. The soldiers advanced. Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to slow, crystallizing into this moment, 2 people standing together against impossible odds, united by something stronger than fear, deeper than culture, truer than the lies that divided their peoples. Thunder rumbled overhead. Though the sky was clear, the soldiers paused, looking up nervously. The Apache had a name for this, the mountain's voice, speaking judgment. Eleanor smiled grimly. Let them come. She and Nietzsche would meet them as equals, as partners, as 2 souls who had found in each other the home the world tried to deny them. The hawk circled once more, then disappeared over the ridge. In the distance, Eleanor thought she heard drums, though perhaps it was only her heart beating its fierce rhythm of defiance and love. Either way, she was ready. They both were. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the soldiers raised their rifles, and the moment of choice arrived. The first shots echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Eleanor fired once, twice, seeing a soldier clutch his shoulder and fall back. Beside her, Nietzsche's rifle spoke with deadly precision despite his wounds, but they were 2 against dozens, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever. "Back!" Nietzsche shouted, pulling Eleanor toward a crevice in the rock face. Bullets whined past, chipping stone inches from their heads. They squeezed into the narrow opening just as a volley would have cut them down. The crevice led to a cave Eleanor hadn't known existed. In the darkness, she could hear Nietzsche's labored breathing, feel warm wetness on her hand where she touched his side. Fresh blood. "You're hit," she said, trying to keep panic from her voice. "Ricochet. Not deep," but his voice carried pain. "This cave goes through the mountain. Old sacred path. Can you see to lead?" Eleanor's eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. A faint glimmer showed deeper in the cave, perhaps an opening on the far side. "I think so." They moved slowly, Eleanor supporting Nietzsche's weight. Behind them, soldiers shouted orders. Some would follow, but the darkness was their ally now. The cave twisted and turned, sometimes opening into chambers where ancient paintings adorned the walls, sometimes narrowing until they had to crawl. Hours passed in that underground world. When they finally emerged, stars pricked the sky, and they were miles from where they'd entered. But Nietzsche could go no further. Eleanor made camp in a hidden grove, tending his wounds by moonlight. The ricochet had indeed been shallow, but combined with his still healing injuries, it was enough to steal his remaining strength. "You need medicine," Eleanor said. "Real help, a doctor." "No white doctor will treat Apache," Nietzsche said weakly. "Then I'll find another way." Eleanor's mind raced. There was a mission she'd heard of. 2 days' ride north. The priests there were said to help anyone, regardless of race, but leaving Nietzsche alone. "I'll go to the mission," she decided. "Get supplies. Medicine. Too dangerous. Soldiers everywhere now. And you'll die without help." Eleanor said bluntly, "That's not acceptable." Despite his protests, she prepared to leave at dawn. She would travel as a Mexican woman, her skin brown enough now to pass, her Spanish adequate thanks to Nietzsche's teaching. It was risky, but no riskier than watching the man she loved fade from infection. 2 days, she promised, kissing him. "Guard our secret well, my heart, and you guard yourself," he replied. "Without you, I have no reason to heal." The journey became a blur of careful movement and constant fear. Eleanor avoided main roads, traveling deer paths and dry washes. Once she hid in thick brush as a cavalry patrol passed so close she could smell their horses' sweat. Another time, she bluffed her way past a checkpoint, affecting a limp and speaking broken Spanish about visiting her sick mother. The mission of San Xavier sat like a white dove in the desert, its walls promising sanctuary. Eleanor approached cautiously, aware that even holy ground might harbor danger. The priest who answered her knock was old, his face mapped with years of sun and sorrow. "Father, I need help," she said in Spanish. "My husband is injured." Father Miguel studied her carefully, her worn clothes, her desperate eyes, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. "Your husband," he said slowly. "He is Apache?" Eleanor's heart stopped. To lie in this place felt wrong, but to tell the truth, yes, she admitted. The priest nodded as if he'd expected this. "Come inside, child, quickly now." He led her to a small room, closing the door firmly. "You are the white woman the soldiers seek, the one who chose love over her own people. How did you—" "News travels even to God's house," Father Miguel said gently. "Tell me what you need." Eleanor nearly wept with relief. She explained about Nietzsche's injuries. The infection she feared was setting in. The priest listened, then began gathering supplies, medicines, bandages, food that would travel. "You risk much helping us," Eleanor said. "I risk my soul if I don't." Father Miguel replied simply, "Christ said to love our neighbors. He didn't say only if they're white, or only if they're Christian." As he packed the supplies, he added, "There's something else you should know. The army has brought in more troops. They plan to sweep every canyon, every hiding place. And there's worse. They're offering bounties for Apache scalps. Men, women, even children. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Bounties? But that's murder. That's war, the priest said sadly. The kind where only one side is expected to follow rules. He gave her a map marking water sources and safe paths, plus a letter that might help if she encountered Mexican authorities. Go with God, child. Save your man if you can, but prepare yourself. Dark times are coming. Eleanor traveled through the night, pushing hard to make up time. Dawn found her in familiar territory. But something was wrong. Smoke rose from several directions, too much to be campfires. As she crested a ridge, she saw the source and her heart nearly stopped. The grove where she'd left Naichi was burning. She ran, heedless of danger, crashing through the underbrush. The hidden camp was destroyed, supplies scattered, shelter torn apart. But no body, no blood except what had already been there. Naichi, she called desperately. Naichi! Movement in the rocks made her spin. Rifle ready. Victorio emerged, his face grim. He lives, he said quickly. We found him yesterday, brought him to our camp, but soldiers track us close, too close. Relief made Eleanor's knees weak. Take me to him. The Apache camp was in chaos when they arrived, people packing frantically, children crying, wounded being prepared for travel. Naichi lay on a travois, conscious but fevered. His eyes found Eleanor immediately. Told you, 2 days, she said, trying for lightness through her tears. Always keep your word. He managed. Eleanor quickly administered the medicines Father Miguel had provided, antibiotics that might turn the tide of infection. But there was no time to rest. Scouts brought word that soldiers were less than an hour behind. We make for Skeleton Canyon, Victorio announced. It's defensible, and there's water. It's also a trap, Nana argued. One way in, one way out. Then we make our stand there, Victorio said firmly. Better to die fighting than be hunted like animals. They moved out in a ragged column, perhaps 30 warriors. Twice that many women and children, all exhausted, many wounded. Eleanor walked beside Naichi's travois, one hand on his burning forehead, the other holding her rifle. Skeleton Canyon lived up to its name, a narrow gash in the earth littered with white rocks that looked like bones in the harsh light. The band filed in, taking positions along the rim while non-combatants sheltered below. This is good ground, Naichi said, rousing enough to assess their position. We can hold here for a time. Long enough, Eleanor said firmly. Though she wondered, long enough for what? For the soldiers to tire and leave? For help that wouldn't come? For a miracle? As if reading her thoughts. Naichi touched her hand. Long enough to live as we choose, die as we choose, together. The soldiers arrived as the sun peaked overhead. They spread out beyond rifle range, clearly in no hurry. They had numbers, supplies, time, all things the Apache lacked. A figure rode forward under a white flag. Not a soldier, but a civilian Eleanor recognized with a start. Thomas Brennan, looking older and harder than when she'd last seen him. I would speak with Eleanor Whitfield. He called out, after quick consultation. Eleanor made her way to the canyon mouth. She kept her rifle ready, trusting nothing. Eleanor, Thomas said, his eyes taking in her Apache dress, her sun-darkened skin, the steel in her spine. I've come to offer you one last chance. I told you before. Listen. His voice cracked with something that might have been desperation. The army won't negotiate with the Apache, but they'll negotiate with you. Surrender yourself. Testify that you were held against your will, and they'll let the others go. You can save them. Eleanor. All of them. Eleanor felt the weight of eyes upon her. Naichi's people. Now her people. Watching to see if she would betray them for safety. And Naichi? She asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. He would have to stand trial, but with your testimony that he protected you, treated you well, prison perhaps, but not hanging. Caged either way, Eleanor said. No. Damn it, Eleanor, Thomas exploded. Look around you. You're outnumbered 10-1. Those children hiding in the rocks. You want their blood on your hands. You have the power to save them. I have the power to betray them," Eleanor corrected. "To tell lies that would see them herded onto reservations to starve. Their children stolen for white schools. Their culture destroyed. That's not salvation. It's life." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "It's just slower death." She turned to go, but Thomas's next words stopped her cold. "The bounty hunters are coming," he said. "The army can't control them. They'll wait until the fighting starts, then move in for scalps. No quarter, no mercy. Is that what you want for your precious Apache? To be butchered for profit?" Eleanor faced him one last time. "What I want," she said clearly, "is for people like you to see us as human, to understand that love doesn't recognize the boundaries you draw, to know that I stand here of my own free will, with the man I chose and the people who accepted me when my own kind cast me out." She raised her rifle. "Tell your soldiers if they want us, they'll have to come take us, and tell them the price will be high." Thomas wheeled his horse around, but called back, "You could have had everything, Eleanor." "I do have everything," she replied. "Everything that matters." As she walked back into the canyon, Lozin met her. That took courage. The warrior woman said, "To refuse safety." "It took nothing," Eleanor said. "How could I buy my life with theirs? How could I face Naichi knowing I'd traded his freedom for mine?" Lozin smiled then, the first real smile Eleanor had seen from her. "Now you are truly Apache," she said. "Not by blood, but by choice. The hardest way, but the truest." The afternoon stretched taut with waiting. Eleanor used the time to check on Naichi, pleased to find his fever breaking thanks to the medicine. He was alert enough to hear about Thomas's offer. "You could have been safe," he said. "I am safe." Eleanor replied, "Here with you. I'm exactly where I belong." He pulled her down for a kiss that tasted of herbs and hope and home. "My warrior woman," he murmured, my heart outside my body. As the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold, the attack finally came. Not the frontal assault they'd expected, but probing actions, testing their defenses. The Apache responded carefully, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. Eleanor took her position among the defenders. No longer the judge's daughter or the fallen woman or the white captive. She was simply Elena, warrior of the Apache, defender of her chosen family. Her rifle spoke alongside the others, her aim true, her heart steady. The real battle would come tomorrow. She knew. This was just the beginning. But for now, in this moment, she stood where she belonged, between two worlds but whole in herself, facing whatever came with courage born of love and freedom chosen over safety. The stars began to appear overhead, ancient witnesses to human struggle. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other, or perhaps it was Apache signals, messages of resistance and resilience. Eleanor smiled grimly and checked her ammunition. Let them come. She was ready. Dawn came painted in smoke and gunpowder. The soldiers had moved into position during the night, surrounding Skeleton Canyon with a ring of steel and determination. But as the first rays of sun struck the canyon walls, it wasn't the army that attacked first. "Bounty hunters!" The cry went up from the Apache sentries. Rough men on horseback, driven by greed rather than duty, charged from the south where the military line was thinnest. "They seek to drive us into the soldiers' guns," Victorio said grimly. "We must—" His words were cut off by unexpected gunfire, not aimed at the Apache, but at the bounty hunters themselves. Through the dust and confusion, Eleanor saw blue uniforms engaging the scalp hunters. "What's happening?" Lozin demanded. A lone rider broke from the military line, racing toward the canyon mouth. Eleanor recognized the uniform of a cavalry captain, and as he drew closer, she gasped. It was her cousin, Marcus Whitfield, whom she hadn't seen in years. "Hold your fire!" Marcus shouted to both sides. "I bear a message from Colonel Harrison." Victorio allowed him to approach. Marcus's eyes found Eleanor, widening at her transformation. but he kept his military bearing. "The colonel has no love for bounty hunters," Marcus said quickly. "He's ordered them dispersed. He offers 1 hour's truce to discuss terms." "We know your terms," Victorio spat. "Surrender or die. New terms." Marcus insisted. He looked directly at Eleanor. "Father Miguel from San Xavier Mission has arrived. He's negotiated a different arrangement." Eleanor's heart leaped. The old priest had not simply given her supplies, he'd ridden to plead their case. Within the hour, a most unusual council convened at the canyon mouth. Colonel Harrison, a stern man with gray whiskers, faced Victorio and his warriors. Father Miguel stood between them, and beside him, to Eleanor's complete shock, stood Mrs. Martinez, the Mexican widow whose fevered night had started Eleanor's downfall. "I have told the colonel the truth," Mrs. Martinez said in accented English. "How Miss Eleanor saved my life, how the town's lies destroyed her. I am ashamed I did not speak louder before." Father Miguel took up the thread. "These people seek not war but survival. The woman you call Eleanor Whitfield has chosen her path freely. The man Nietzsche has protected and cherished her. Their bond harms no one. She's a white woman living as a savage," one of the officers protested. "She's a woman living as she chooses," Father Miguel corrected firmly. "As our Lord said, 'Judge not, lest ye be judged.'" Colonel Harrison had remained silent through this, studying the assembled group. Finally, he spoke. "I'm a soldier, not a judge. My orders are to pacify this territory, but I'm also a practical man." He looked at Victorio. "Your people fight fiercely, but you cannot win. Not against the numbers we'll bring. Then we die fighting," Victorio said simply. "Or," the colonel said slowly, "you accept a different path." The proposal he outlined was unprecedented. The Apache would be granted safe passage to Mexico, where the government had agreed to give them sanctuary in the Sierra Madre. They would live free, but in exile. The alternative was annihilation. And Elena? Nietzsche spoke for the first time, having insisted on being present despite his wounds. The colonel's mouth tightened. "Miss Whitfield presents a complication. By law, she should stand trial for aiding hostiles. However," he glanced at Father Miguel and Mrs. Martinez. "Given the testimony presented about the injustices done to her and her current circumstances, she would be permitted to accompany you into exile." "Permanently?" Eleanor asked. "You would forfeit your American citizenship," the colonel said bluntly, "never to return on pain of imprisonment. You would cease to be Eleanor Whitfield in the eyes of the law." Eleanor felt the weight of the decision, to forever close the door on the world of her birth. Then she looked at Nietzsche, at the people who'd become her family, and the choice was no choice at all. "Eleanor Whitfield is already dead," she said clearly. "I am Elena of the Apache." But not everyone agreed with the terms. Nana and several warriors argued fiercely against trusting white promises. The debate raged as the sun climbed higher, and tensions rose with it. Then shots rang out from the canyon rim. The bounty hunters, regrouping after their initial repulse, had circled around. One of them had Victorio in his sights. Eleanor moved without thought. Her rifle came up, and her shot took the bounty hunter center mass. He tumbled from the rocks, dead before he hit the ground. But more were coming, and chaos erupted. "So much for truces!" Nana snarled, firing at the advancing hunters. "My men aren't attacking!" Colonel Harrison shouted over the gunfire. And indeed, the soldiers seemed as surprised as anyone. In the melee that followed, Apache and cavalry found themselves fighting side by side against the common enemy of the lawless bounty hunters. Eleanor stayed close to Nietzsche, defending him as he struggled to defend others despite his wounds. Marcus appeared at her elbow, firing his pistol at the hunters. "Always did know how to find trouble. Cousin," he said with dark humor. "It's a family gift," Eleanor replied. Dropping another attacker, the battle was fierce but brief. Caught between Apache marksmen and disciplined cavalry, the bounty hunters broke and fled. As the gun smoke cleared, an odd quiet fell. Soldiers and warriors eyed each other warily, unsure how to proceed after fighting together It was Father Miguel who broke the tension. "Perhaps God shows us a sign," he said, "that enemies can become allies when facing true evil." Colonel Harrison holstered his pistol, decision crystallizing on his weathered face. "The offer stands. Safe passage to Mexico, starting immediately. We'll escort you to the border, ensure no one else interferes." Victorio looked at his people, weary, wounded, but still proud. "We will go," he said at last, "but we do not surrender. We choose this path for our children's sake. Understood?" The colonel said quietly. He turned to Eleanor. "Miss Elena, I suppose I should say. Your cousin has something for you." Marcus produced a leather satchel. "Your mother's jewelry. What's left of it. And papers that might help in Mexico. It's not much, but..." Eleanor embraced him quickly. "It's enough. Thank you." "Be happy," Marcus whispered. "That's all any of us can ask for." The exodus began that afternoon. The Apache packed what little they had while soldiers formed a protective corridor. It was surreal. The same forces that had hunted each other now working to ensure safe passage. Eleanor walked beside Nietzsche's travois, her hand in his. He was stronger now, the fever broken, flesh wounds beginning to heal cleanly. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Eleanor answered immediately. "You? Only that you must leave your homeland for me. My homeland cast me out. You gave me a new one." She squeezed his hand. "Home isn't a place. Nietzsche, it's who we choose to be, who we choose to stand with," as they crested the final ridge before descending toward Mexico. Eleanor turned for one last look at the American landscape. Somewhere beyond those mountains lay Cedar Ridge, with its narrow mines and cruel whispers. Somewhere lay the grave of her father, the life she'd been raised to live. But here, walking toward an uncertain future with certain love, she found only freedom. Thomas Brennan sat his horse beside Colonel Harrison, watching the Apache column disappear into Mexico. The woman he'd once thought to marry walked with them, transformed beyond recognition, yet somehow more herself than she'd ever been in silk and propriety. "Will they make it?" Thomas asked. "The Apache? They're survivors. They'll adapt." The colonel's eyes tracked Eleanor's distant figure. "As for her, any woman with courage enough to choose love over safety will make her own way." "I could have saved her," Thomas said bitterly. "No," the colonel replied. "She saved herself, just not in the way you wanted. In the Sierra Madre, the Apache made their new home. It wasn't the land of their ancestors, but it was free land where they could live according to their ways. Elena now and forever, helped bridge the gap between her adopted people and the Mexican villagers who were initially suspicious of the refugees. Nietzsche recovered fully, and by the next spring, Elena carried their first child. She delivered the baby in the traditional Apache way, with Lozin and the other women attending. When she placed the infant, a daughter, in Nietzsche's arms, tears ran down the warrior's face. "What shall we name her?" Elena asked. "Dawn," Nietzsche said, "for she is our new beginning." Years passed. More children came. Elena learned to weave baskets so fine they were traded throughout Mexico. She taught the children, Apache and Mexican alike, to read and write in multiple languages. She helped preserve the stories and customs of the Apache, writing them down for future generations. Sometimes traders brought news from the north. Cedar Ridge had boomed and busted with the mines. Mrs. Henley had died of apoplexy. The minister had been run out of town for embezzlement. All the people who'd condemned Eleanor had faced their own falls from grace. But Elena rarely thought of that old life. Her world was here, in Nietzsche's arms, in their children's laughter, in the community that had embraced her when she had nothing to offer but herself. One evening, as the sun painted the Sierra Madre in shades of gold and crimson, an old Mexican trader arrived with a package addressed to Elena de los Apaches. Inside was a Bible and a note from Father Miguel. "My child, I am dying and wished you to have this. Inside you'll find pressed flowers from the mission garden. They remind me that beauty can grow anywhere, even in the harshest ground. You have proven this truth. Live well, love deeply, and know that God smiles upon those who choose courage over convention. Your friend in Christ, Father Miguel." Elena held the Bible to her chest, remembering the kindness of a priest who saw beyond boundaries. That night, she told her children the story again, how their mother had been branded a fallen woman, how their father had declared she belonged to him forever, how together they'd found freedom in exile and love in defiance of two worlds' expectations. "Were you really fallen, Mama?" her daughter Dawn asked. "Oh, yes," Elena said, pulling the child close. "I fell from everything I was supposed to be, and in falling, I learned to fly." The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed her transformation from Eleanor to Elena, from caged bird to soaring eagle. Somewhere, perhaps, the spirits of all who died in the clash of cultures watched and approved. Naichi joined her, still moving with a warrior's grace despite the passing years. He wrapped his arms around his family, and Elena leaned into his warmth. Complete at last, she had been branded a fallen woman. She had fallen indeed, fallen into truth, into love, into a life authentic and free. And in that fall, she had found her wings. The desert night sang its ancient songs around them, and Elena added her voice to the chorus, no longer the judge's daughter or the scorned woman or even the white Apache, but simply herself, finally and forever home. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Wild West, where love conquered prejudice and courage overcame convention. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you are. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of romance, adventure, and the untamed frontier. What did you think of Eleanor and Naichi's story? Share your thoughts. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow lovers of Western romance. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizon.